Hello and welcome to today's Career Month webinar. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled The Next Big Thing or the Next Big Flop, Validating a Startup Idea and Scaling a Business. Today we will hear from alumnus Ian Sefferman. Ian is a co-founder of Assembler Labs, Detroit's startup studio, where he focuses on validating an idea and then quickly killing or scaling it. Previously, he was SVP at Tune, a mobile marketing analytics company. He sold his first startup, Mobile Dev HQ, to Tune in 2014. Prior to starting Mobile Dev HQ, he was a software engineer for Amazon.com. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Ian.
Thank you. Let me grab video here. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I'm really excited to go through this. This is probably my favorite topic in the entire world. So as Adam said, this is going to be the next big thing or the next big flop, and we're going to focus on how do you waste as little time and as little money as possible deciding upon whether your idea for a startup is worth pursuing or not. So right now, I'm going to start with a quick poll just to sort of see where everybody's at. If you can show the poll, the question here is, do you guys have an idea right now that you're actively thinking about turning into a startup today? So realistically, I believe that finding a startup idea is relatively simple. The validation of the idea is a really hard process, and it's all about how do you find the truth. So we'll talk about what that means, and I'm going to push forward here. And are we about done with that poll? I think so. Great. All right.
Yep, we're all set.
Great. So setting some context. So first, who am I? As was said, I'm a startup guy based in Detroit. I recently came back to the Midwest after a long stint after graduation. I was in Seattle for about 13 years, and I've been on all sides of the table. So I've been a founder of a company, I've been an operator of a company, and I've been a little bit of an angel investor as well. I've seen $0 in revenue all the way through to about 75 million, and then past that when I was with Amazon, obviously multiple billions there. I currently run Assembler Labs. Our job is to dream up crazy ideas and then validate them quickly, and then spin out the best ones. It's literally the dream job in that you get to come up with the craziest ideas you can possibly think of, and then validate whether or not you think those could actually become real businesses. Prior to Assembler Labs, I co-founded a mobile analytics startup. I sold that in 2014. We grew the acquirer to about 350 employees, and then I left most recently in May to do this startup studio. I've really been lucky to be able to be a part of some of the best organizations and work with some of the best investors as well. So Tune was funded by Excel. You might know Excel as the VC that wrote the first check into Facebook. And Mobile Dev HQ was funded by Techstars. So we went through Techstars. I've been a mentor in Techstars. I helped select the Techstars classes, and I'm also an LP in some of the Techstars funds. So I really have had a cool opportunity to see everything from a bunch of different angles. With that out of the way, some context about the types of startups and the validation that we're going to be talking about. Really, our goal is to validate a startup idea, and you can think about different types of ideas across sort of different vectors here. And I want to be clear that this isn't about all ideas. This is just about startup ideas. So there's really 3 different types of new businesses that I think about. The first is local businesses. That's sort of your classic Main Street retailers, restaurants, those types of businesses. Then there's a lifestyle business. That's a cash flow focused, smaller, medium size, not really focused on growth. And then there's the startup, and that's the one that we're going to talk about. These are the built for scale, get big fast. You really want to own market share and grow. You're not as focused on profits as you are on growth. So we're going to talk about just that last type of business. The first step to an idea is, the first step to validation is actually coming up with the idea, of course. So we believe that ideas are everywhere. You can find them in any situation of your life. We have been at this for about 6 or 7 months. And we have a backlog of about 50 ideas. We've already tackled almost 10 ideas. So we think that actually we could have had probably double or triple the amount of ideas. So really ideas are a dime a dozen. The value is created in the actual execution. But when you're thinking about how you actually tackle a big an idea or come up with an idea, tackle a big market. Where is there a lot of dollars being swashed around in the system? Tackle poor experiences. Anytime where you think that you've had a poor experience personally, or technological changes. So a great example is what we're seeing with artificial intelligence today. Artificial intelligence has opened up the opportunity for a huge number of new businesses that wouldn't have been possible before sort of the processor power and the algorithms have gotten as good as they are. Think autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. Those are built on the fact that we are able to have the AI that we have today. So let's look at some of those poll results real fast to see, are you guys already at the stage of idea or not? All right, great. So about 70% of you have ideas and 30% don't. So that's perfect. So for the ones who don't, I think, again, just they're everywhere. Go look and you can find them anywhere. And for the ones that do, we'll talk about how we can go through the validation process. Ideas can be broken down into three distinct pieces. So these are the pieces that we think about in our day job every single day. At the top level, they're sort of concentric circles, and each component is valuable to the validation process. So at that top level, at that outermost circle, is the market. That's what sector, what industry, or what customer does this target. The next one down is the problem. So really, this is the one that we think is actually the most important piece. What problem are you focused on? We talk a lot to ourselves about falling in love with a problem, not falling in love with a solution. So what we find is that your idea or our idea is wrong. Whatever the idea may be, one thing that we are absolutely convinced of is that the first idea is wrong. So we don't want to focus on what that solution is as much as we want to focus on what that problem is. And we'll talk through what that means. And then lastly is that solution. This is probably what you're thinking of when you're thinking of your idea. To give you guys an example of this, we have an idea that we went through, and we ultimately didn't pursue it. But the idea was a Zillow for small businesses. So being able to estimate the value of a business and then provide a marketplace so that you could go buy that business or sell your business. The market there was really small business lending or small business buying. The problem there is that it's really hard to value businesses, and the liquidity in the market, going and buying a small business is actually relatively difficult. And then the solution that we had was sort of that pre-valuation that could give you that Zestimate, as Zillow calls it. And so that was a business that we thought would be interesting to talk through, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. All right, so we've done the basics. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here. We're going to talk some tactics and we're going to talk some strategies, but we're going to go through 5 core parts. The first is the market. As we said, the market is really important. And then we're going to go into customer demand. That's really going to focus on that problem piece. Then we're going to go into distribution, how you actually get your idea in front of people. Then defensibility, can you build a moat around this? And then lastly, technical feasibility, can you actually build the product? You need to sort of satisfy each of these. We'll talk about how you validate each one independently, but we believe that you need to validate all of them to sort of make the best idea. And well, you might be able to get away with having maybe one of these that doesn't seem obvious, or maybe it's not perfect for your idea. Certainly, if you have 2 or more that it doesn't seem to be panning out, it's way more effective to just kill the idea today than it is to go down the line later and spend a bunch of money and spend a bunch of time not hitting this. And one thing that I think is worth talking about is when you're trying to build venture scale businesses. So these are the billion-dollar businesses, the unicorns as they're called. Really, what your goal is to find the one business that will do that. The one business that will actually get to $1 billion in valuation. That means that what you're focused on is not your hitting percentage, right? You're trying to hit a home run. So it's not your hitting percentage, it's not your slugging percentage, it's literally just the number of home runs. And the number of home runs is highly correlated to the number of at-bats that you take. So it's far more valuable to kill a good idea in favor of waiting for a great idea than it is to go after a good idea that might be worth, let's say, $100 million, which is a great outcome. But you should focus on the ones that you really believe will be $1 billion business. And then if you hit 100 million, great, that's still a good outcome. But being confident in your ability to focus on great ideas versus good ideas. And our goal, as I said earlier, our goal for validating these ideas is to do this as quickly and as efficiently as possible with the least cost. So let's start with the market here. Again, we're targeting those venture scale startups. We're targeting a startup needs to be able to get to $100 million in revenue per year or $1 billion in valuation. Typically, those go somewhere hand in hand, but let's sort of have that in our mind. That means that you absolutely have to have a big market, and you have to have a growing market as well. In many ways, the market can be more important than the idea, and that's because a good idea in a bad market never wins, but a bad idea in a good market can win. And what I mean by that is, if you have a great idea, but there's only, let's say, $3 million out there that you could possibly grab, well, that's never going to be a $100 million business by definition. But a bad idea in a good market, let's say it's a multi-billion-dollar market, even if it's a bad idea, you can sort of iterate your way and pivot your way into a good idea later. Again, this is the falling in love with the problem, not falling in love with the solution piece. So we think a good market is, you should really have about $1 billion in addressable revenue. You can do so on less, but I think that's sort of the goal. If you're focused on maybe a new technology, let's say, our last startup was in mobile, then you're really focused on, and we started in 2009, then you're really focused on growth. The growth of the mobile ecosystem was so fast that even though it wasn't a multi-billion-dollar market at the time, it was very clear that it was going to be in just a couple of years. So to size the market, you can either go top down or bottom up. We'll start with bottom up here. So read from the bottom and come up. At the first, what we're going to do, this idea is an idea for software for wine grape pickers out in wineries and vineyards. So our goal is to build software for the top quartile of professional wine grape pickers. That's the target user. And then secondly, we know that they're willing to pay $200 a month. We believe then that there's about 100,000 wine grape pickers in the world. 25,000 of them are the top quartile by definition. So 25,000 times 200 times 12 is around $60 million a year in revenue. And let's say that they're growing at around 10% per year. So that would give us an additional $6 million next year. So this is a relatively small market. By the way, these are totally made up numbers, but this is a relatively small market. It wouldn't be super exciting. On the flip side, you can also do top downsizing. So this is sort of starting at the overall market and then figuring out what percentage you can whittle down to. So again, fictional numbers, but let's say you're Tesla back in the day and you're saying I want to create an electric sports car. So top down, the sports car market would be about $10 billion per year. Electric cars make up only 5% of that market, so maybe that's 500 million. And then we think that we can have about 20% market penetration there. So that's about $100 million per year in revenue. But let's pretend it's growing fast at, say, 25% year over year. So that would give us, next year an additional 25 million. So that's a better size market, but still I'd like to see it more in the $1 billion space. Now, one of the things that I would say here is try to make sure that your bottoms up and your top down sizing sort of match. They're never gonna be equal, but they should be on the same order of magnitude and roughly similar. It's really important that you get the market sizing right, because again, if you have a bad market, it's just never worth it. Of the ideas that we kill, I would say that probably 50% of them are due to market just not being big enough here. So you want to focus on a really good market. Now, that being said, when we're focused on the market, let's remember that there's a difference between a wedge and a vision. So a wedge is sort of, where are you starting? What are you attacking first? And the vision is, where can this go overall? This is one of the trickiest things to do as a product person. I actually feel a lot of pain when I go through this process, because for me, this is about finding an idea that I know 10 people are going to absolutely love. That's the wedge. But then making sure that there is a complementary vision that goes along with it. So the example I have here is Facebook. So Facebook, of course, started with the wedge of a social network for Harvard students. Once they built out the social network for Harvard students, they realized that it's very complementary to go to all universities. They were able to go to all universities. And then they realized going from universities to high school was actually complementary as well. And then they were able to go to everyone. And the vision up front was sort of to go to everyone, but the vision to start, or the wedge to start, was to go to Harvard. The nice thing is Harvard and everyone kind of acted relatively similarly in the way that they were able to get distribution, in the product that they were able to build. Those all look the same. What you don't want is, you don't want a wedge that is one customer set that acts one way with a vision that is a completely different customer set that acts a different way. So an example there might be you target an initial consumer product, but your goal is to build an enterprise product that you're selling for a lot of money. The expertise that you will build up in your wedge of the consumer product is how to do consumer marketing, how to build a product for consumers that's easy to use. The enterprise market, you will have no understanding of how to actually go to market, how to have a sales team, how to qualify your potential buyers, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that those are complementary markets to what your wedge is. All right, so that's the market. The next piece here that we want to focus on is the customer demand. This is my personal favorite. I think this is where so much of the love for what you're doing can shine through. And make something people want is really what this is all about. That's a phrase that I steal from Paul Graham, who co-founded Y Combinator. And make something people want is just this idea that at the end of the day, everything is solved if people love what you're doing and they want what you're doing. I said earlier that I believe every idea is wrong. Your goal with figuring out and validating customer demand is, how wrong is it? So we'll talk a little bit about the tactics to actually validate how wrong it is and validate that customer demand. When we're thinking about that, we want to know, how acute is that customer demand, and then how broad is that, how acute is that problem, and then how broad is that problem. And that really gives us a sense of the customer demand. So some tactics. The first is, whatever you're doing, you have to get out of the building, is the phrase that I like to use. You have to actually talk to customers. The single biggest mistake that every entrepreneur makes, and every product person makes, is that they go into a hole and they think about their problem and they think about their solution, and they come out with a product maybe months or years later, and they've never actually talked to anybody about it. And a lot of the time that's totally understandable, because it's embarrassing. It can be incredibly embarrassing to tell somebody, hey, I have this idea, I don't know anything about it, tell me what you're thinking. Or, hey, I have this really interesting idea, I've built it, but it's this horrible first version, and you want to be embarrassed about it. That's okay, but it is embarrassing. So get out of the building. One way to get out of the building, more figuratively than literally, is to build a landing page. So it's one of the cheapest things you can do. It usually takes a few hours, maybe a day with design, and you can buy it, right off of, let's say, Squarespace or something like that. You want to do this, again, before there's any product actually built. So if it's a software product, don't code anything. If it's a hardware product, don't build anything yet. Your goal is simply to build a landing page that is focused on the problem and your proposed solution. And you want to see who will actually buy this product. So do people seem to like it? Do they contact you? Do they try to buy it? so on and so forth. And yes, you can actually say, buy it now. If I'm never a big fan of even white lies here. So I typically say pre-order a product. Be very clear about the state that it's in, but feel free to go through the actual process, get them to do it. But of course, just building the landing page isn't going to actually drive traffic to that page. It's not just because you have the page doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to have hundreds of thousands of folks visiting that page. So how do you get that traffic, those users to that web page? That's where demand generation comes in. So this is probably the only place where I'll tell you to actually spend a little bit of money. But if you need to spend a little bit of money, figure out how you can get users to the site. There's any number of channels to do this from. You have Google with search ads. Those are fantastic because they provide the intent. These people are searching for what you're talking about. Facebook is great because you can get really in depth on demographics. So if this is a product for 18 to 34-year-old men, great, go target those. Instagram is really visual, so if you have a visual product, that's great. LinkedIn, obviously super professional, so that's a good opportunity there. So this is an example from our Zillow for small businesses where we ran a few ads. This is just one of them on Google, and you can see what we did was we tried to get business valuations or give business owners valuations. So anytime they were looking for a valuation, we figured that was a great insight that they may want to sell, or at least are curious about how much their business was worth. So we wanted to offer this for very cheap or free. So we spent under $60 all in. We probably spent a few $100s, but here you can see the number of impressions, the number of clicks. So we sent 38 people to our website. We were able to get 38 individual reactions, and that's great. So the goal then is to just see what happens to those users once they get to that landing page. If you can't get users via ads for some reason, figure out a way to go guerrilla here. We are constantly just trying to come up with creative ways to actually talk to our potential customers and our potential users. One of our favorites is to go where they are. That can either be physically in real life or online. An example here is that we have an idea that targets Uber and Lyft drivers. So the first place that we decided to go was, it turns out that Uber and Lyft drivers like to communicate with each other on forums online. So we started talking on these forums online, and we were promptly banned. It turns out that people don't want even pseudo advertising because they want you to pay for that. So then we said, all right, where do we go next? Well, as it turns out, Uber and Lyft frequently have offices in all of their major cities, so they're markets that drivers can go to. So we actually just stood outside of an Uber office, and every time somebody would walk out, we would say, hey, can we talk to you about our idea? And we just learned from them. What did they like? What didn't they like? Would they actually buy it? We had an iPad with us, and we'd say, hey, will you sign up? Will you put in your credit card? And then, of course, the other way was very simple for that market as well. We literally just got in Uber rides. Sometimes we would take an Uber absolutely nowhere. We would say, take us about 10 minutes away, drop us off at a random location, and then we call another one and take it back. And that gave us 10 minutes of conversation with the driver. The last thing that I would say here is, I mentioned this up front, you can have credit cards, you can ask for something. And really, this is so important because what is called the penny gap is real, which is to say, people will often tell you that they like what you're up to, and people don't want to be mean about a startup idea. So make them actually pull out their credit card, make them actually try to pay, right? What you'll find is that people who are really nice when it's $0 for them to be nice, the moment it's 1 penny, 99% of them go away. So try to get their credit card details. Try to actually ask them. Again, you can just drop that on the floor. You don't actually have to charge them. You can tell them it's a pre-order. In fact, don't store those credit card details anywhere because you don't want PCI compliance. Just drop everything on the floor. Don't even send it to your servers if you don't want, so on and so forth. So that's sort of the guerrilla tactics. That gives us the market and the customer demand side. The next big thing is, if you've proven that they want it, how the heck do you get it in their hands? This is where distribution and go-to-market strategy are really important to understand up front. It differs greatly by type of business, and it honestly differs very widely for every specific business. So it's hard to understand how to validate this, but what I'm going to talk through is, how do you understand the different types of business and the models that they use, which will allow you to go out and test those models for this opportunity. So first, our consumer ideas. With consumer ideas, you're going to have to rely heavily on marketing, whether that's organic or paid. So organic being free marketing, where, let's say, SEO, social, things like that. You're going to rely heavily on products, where think virality. So Facebook was very viral to bring your friends on, but that's sort of one type of virality. Another type is, think PayPal, where if you invited a friend, you both would get, let's say, $5. So there's actual money involved, but super viral as a result. Or lastly, can you sort of allow your channels to do the marketing for you? Let's say it's a physical product. You're going to sell on Amazon to give you more distribution than if you just sold at a local retail store. The goal when you're thinking about consumer products and the distribution strategy is to focus on your sort of conversion rate. How many people see your product versus how many people actually are going to buy your product, and is that sort of enough to allow you to spend money to continue to grow? That's really what you want to focus on. Do people care enough for this distribution strategy? Then there's prosumer, what I call prosumer at least, which is anything that's sort of under $1,000 per year. Anything that's under $1,000 per year is, it's more than what a consumer is going to pay for usually a piece of software, but it's less than what a company as a whole is going to pay typically for a piece of software. So on a prosumer piece of software in particular, you often have that marketing team. That marketing team is going to be a lot of organic, finding the ways to drive traffic for free. And then you're going to have your product do all of the work for you. A great example here is Evernote. So Evernote, very incredible marketing team, able to get a lot of word of mouth. And then the product did all of the work of actually upselling to get people to buy. There's no sales cycle on prosumer, or at least there shouldn't be. Your focus is really on that conversion rate. So that's what you want to focus on. Next is what I'll call Smb sales. So these are any sort of products up to let's say $10,000 a year in revenue. Looks very similar to the prosumer, except for you have this additional layer of the inside sales rep. So marketing now is all about how do they fill the top of the funnel, and then that inside sales rep is all about how do they follow up with the leads that come in via the top of the funnel and ultimately close them. A great example here is HubSpot. HubSpot, vast majority of their customers spend somewhere under $10,000 per year, and they have a content machine that drives, I would imagine, millions of users, millions of views per month. And then once they get a lead, their inside sales team is on it, calling you, emailing you, getting things scheduled, and getting you closed. They should have a really short sales cycle. You have to focus on making sure that those inside sales reps can do their job really fast. It's in many ways a volume game. And lastly are the enterprise sales. So this is the $100,000 per year or more. You can see this one gets much more complicated very quickly. This is actually what our last company, Tune, operated at. Our price point sort of started at about $100,000 per year. So you had a marketing team, it fills the funnel again. Now you add sales development reps in. These are folks who qualify, and ultimately book meetings. So when the lead comes in, their goal is to simply qualify whether or not this is somebody who can pay, who has a need. Your product's going to solve that use case for them. Then the account execs come in once they're qualified, build the relationship, ultimately close the deal. Sales engineers are there in many cases, if this is your type of product, to work with the AEs to ensure the technical side is going to all play out. And then ultimately also probably do the implementation. The big ratio here to think about is the cost to acquire a customer. How much are you spending on sales and marketing versus the lifetime value of a customer? So let's just say you're selling something at $200K per year, and the average customer lasts 5 years. So you get $1 million per customer. The benchmark that most companies would like to beat is they would like to see that be 3x the cost to acquire a user. So you probably wouldn't want to be spending much more than, let's say, $300,000 or so for that $1 million. But $300,000 is a lot of money for a customer. Obviously, this means getting on a plane, flying to their offices, wining and dining. This is typically relationship building. So these are the different types of distribution strategies. Again, you're going to have to figure out how do you get in front of the folks that you want to get in front of. And then is this model, and which model is going to work? How are you going to make it work? What unique play are you going to have to do to do so? That's the distribution piece. So we've talked about marketing, customer demand, distribution. Now we get to defensibility. And defensibility is probably the hardest to spot, whether or not you believe that your business can be defensible. And that's because most defensibility doesn't show up right out of the gate. It often shows up later. Rather than drone on and on and on about defensibility, I'm going to point you to our favorite book because it does a better job than anybody could ever do to discuss what I think are the best ways to build a moat. So it's called 7 Powers by Hamilton Helmer. And he goes through 7 different powers of businesses, 7 different ways that you can build moats. The first is economies of scale. That is when the cost to produce goes down as the volume that you're producing goes up. Think Amazon in this case. The cost to build a fulfillment center is really high, but the more product you can push through it, the lower the cost per product. The second is network effects. This is when the value of the business goes up with each additional input. Great example is Facebook or a social network where every additional user makes this more valuable to the whole network. Then counter positioning is one of my favorites, actually. This is when the new business model can actually disrupt the incumbents. Think Netflix in this case. So we all used to go to Blockbuster and rent a VHS or a DVD for, I don't remember what it was, like a week. And we'd all end up paying tens or hundreds of dollars per year in late fees. Netflix comes around and says, get them straight to your door and there's no late fees, keep them as long as you want. They counter-positioned. 4 is switching costs. That's where the cost for a new solution outweighs the benefit. Apple is in the middle of this right now. So if you have an iPhone and you have an Apple Watch and you use AirPods and you store your data in iCloud, all of a sudden the cost to switch is really high if you wanted to, say, go to Android. So they built really high switching costs there. Branding is a really interesting one. This is sort of where historical information about a business provides the perception of increased value. I think Uber has done a fantastic job here. We say, let's all take an Uber, even if we actually take a Lyft, for instance. And that is the historical information of them being first to market, of them having the most innovative product that allows us to say Uber is the best, and we're often going to use it far more than we use Lyft, as an example. Cornered resource. So this is sort of access to a coveted resource. I like thinking outside the box on this one. People are a hugely coveted resource, and Pixar is a great example of this with their founders like John Lasseter. Because they had those founders as a cornered resource, they were able to consistently create the best movies. And then lastly, process power. So the business runs so smoothly that it enables the cost to go down or the product to be superior. And 2 automotive examples, Ford and Toyota. Back in the day, Ford creating the assembly line was a total process improvement that allowed them to offer cars more cheaply. Toyota more recently, with all of their initiatives, they've been able to make their manufacturing as really just unbelievably impressive from a quality perspective. So those are the 7. Read more in depth about those. I think that this book is just unbelievable. So we've talked for a long while now about all of the different ways that you can sort of validate your business. Only now are we even going to begin talking about building something. We really waited a long time. We went through a lot of validation before we would even get to this point. But again, we still want to reduce the amount that we're going to build as much as possible. So this is, building something is the highest cost thing you could possibly do, especially if it's a software product or a hardware product. And we want to de-risk that. Our goal in the validation phase is not to actually build the whole product. Our goal in the validation phase is to make sure that there's very little risk in building the product, that it'll actually work. We're not going to go down a rabbit hole only to find out the solution is impossible or doesn't work. So how can you de-risk that feasibility there? The first is analogs. I love using analogs because it's probably the cheapest way you could possibly do it. So as an example, we have friends at Rover. If you don't know Rover, it's a $1 billion plus business that is literally the Airbnb for dogs. So instead of sending your dog to a kennel when you leave, go out of town, you send your dog to a random stranger's house where that stranger takes better care of them. They didn't have to build anything from a technology perspective to know that this would work because they literally have the analog of Airbnb. Airbnb is the same with ratings and a marketplace. They knew that technology would in fact work. Most of the time it's not quite this straightforward. Analogs can often look like some sort of combination of different businesses that exist today. So as an example, our Zillow for small businesses was one analog, one analogy there, where we could understand that, yes, with enough data, you should actually be able to accurately value a business like they value a home. And then there's another one called Biz Buy Sell, which is a marketplace for buying and selling businesses, small businesses. So because we knew that the marketplace technology existed as well as the home valuation technology existed, we figured that you could actually build both together. So that's one piece. The next piece to sort of de-risk is figuring out a way to cheaply build a prototype. I say cheaply because that's the most important piece here. They're not meant to see the light of day. What we often talk about is prototypes are meant to sort of find the brain. What's the meaty and important part of the technology, and can that be built? That's what we're trying to get at. It'll become a brain without a body. So we just want to make sure that could actually be built. Let's say you're building, AI for doctors to understand whether or not you can look at X-rays. A computer can look at X-rays and accurately tell if there's a broken bone. Well, you wouldn't need the full piece of software. You would just want to do that sort of image recognition and AI to understand whether or not there was indeed the right set of broken bones classified. Again, the goal though is to keep this as cheap as possible. You just want to make sure that's going to work at this stage. You'll build out the actual product later. So this is sort of the conclusion here. At the end of the day, finding ideas is really simple, as we talked about up front. Finding ideas that work is really hard. We think that about 10% of our ideas are going to actually see the light of day. Validating those early saves us so much time and so much energy. But the truth of the matter is it's not black and white to know if those ideas are working or not. You'll notice that I never brought up the actual metrics that I think make one idea successful and another idea not. That's because I don't think that you can do that globally. I think that every business is going to have its warts, and there are many shades of gray to deciding whether or not you want to pursue an idea. We hope that you can find an idea that has the right product, has the right market, the customer demand is really high, it's defensible, you can get great distribution, and it's technically feasible. But in many cases, you can't get all of those. So you learn what you can, and then take the risk that you believe in. If you don't see, let's say, as an example, the defensibility of a business right up front, but you think that could be learned or earned over time, great. If you believe in that, go for it. And ultimately, we hope that validating will build the best businesses and the biggest businesses possible. And that's all I have. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Ian. So at this point, we can do some moderated Q&A. So if you have not done so, please submit any questions that you have to the questions box, and I will share those with Ian. So we do have a few to get us started here. The first, how do you, what are the steps in terms of measuring once you've gone through the validation phases? How exactly do you measure up the scaling aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we didn't touch on the actual scaling too much in this presentation, but I think when it comes to scaling, it naturally follows out of the validation. You're going to know how to attack the market. You're going to know what the right product idea actually is, so on and so forth. And at the earliest stages, the benchmarks that I really care about is I want to see a sort of a 6 to 10% growth in whatever that KPI is that you care about. Try to make it revenue, at least I do. I always try to make that revenue, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's user growth or something else. But you want to see a 6 to 10% growth every single week. If you hit that, you're knocking it out of the park. It'll take you, if you're doing about 6% a week, I think it'll take you about a quarter to double. You'll be doubling every quarter. That compounds really, really fast. At a little bit later stage, let's say you have maybe $1 million or $2 million in revenue by this point. I think you definitely want to grow somewhere between 100 to 200% per year. The best businesses are going to be growing at 100% year over year, even at $50 to $100 million in revenue. So your goal is growth, growth, growth when you're working on these businesses. I think 6 to 10% per week on whatever metric it is a great way to quantify the scaling.
Great. And a related question, somebody is working specifically in the social responsibility sector. Would there be any differences or qualifications that you would make in terms of applying that scale-up concept for that sector specifically, or are there differences in sectors in terms of measuring scale?
I mean, look, I think if you are, regardless of the sector and regardless of sort of the mission of the business, I think the amount that you want to scale always will remain consistent. Now, obviously, if you're thinking of like a nonprofit, right, that would be very different than just sort of a for-profit, but that is, let's call it a clean energy type business. That one you would still want to see scale really quickly.
Great. So you shared some really creative, I think, ways to get to the market in terms of the guerrilla strategies. Do you have any creative ideas in terms of ways to generate ideas, keeping in mind the market and the problem and the solution? Some ways to kickstart that ideation if it's difficult.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often do is we literally will say, I'm really interested in, let's take an example here. I'm really interested in sports technology. So technology that impacts sports, whether that's watching a game or helmet safety, something like that, anything in sort of the sports realm. And then what we do is we say, okay, what are some of the interesting technologies out there being used today? I talked about artificial intelligence earlier. So let's say artificial intelligence. Let's say that we saw a great startup that is using AI for video recognition. We could maybe say, how could you apply that to the market that we wanted? And maybe you come up with a brand new way of doing player tracking on a field that you could go sell to the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, so on. So using those sort of the new technologies in other sectors and finding ways to apply them to a market that you're really excited about is one way that I think is really effective for us. Another way, honestly, like the best way is just ask around, right? Say to your friends, say to your family, like, what experience did you hate recently when you were working with a company? Is it that you didn't like your financial software at work, the expense software? Why didn't you like it? What's your biggest pain? We often will just call up different types of markets. We'll say, hey, we're thinking about executive assistants as a target customer. We'll just try to get on the phone with 20 executive assistants and literally just ask, what's the biggest pain in your life today? And if there's a common pain, we say, wow, can we maybe solve that? Let's think about it and take it from there. So hopefully that helps.
Great. Another question dealing with the length of time in this process, which so the question is, how much time do you spend typically validating an idea? 1 day, 1 month, 3 months, a year? Those were.
Yeah, we've killed an idea in 24 hours, and it was we knew pretty fast that was a really horrible idea. The truth is, probably most ideas are killed within a month for sure. Probably 2 to 3 weeks. But the ones that are going to work are the ones that are going to take the longest by definition, right? Because they continue to work. Maybe we look at the market for some idea and we're like, nope, that was a terrible idea, and that takes us 24 hours. But then, a market maybe we really love takes a week to get through the market, and then 2 weeks to get through customer demand, and then another week to understand, or 2 weeks to understand distribution, a few weeks to understand defensibility, so on and so forth. So as you sort of like keep knocking off of the trigger points where you could say no, it takes a little bit longer. So I would say our goal, I can give you a goal, is we have 2 people on right now. It's myself and my co-founder, and our goal is to spin out 6 to 8 businesses in 2 to 3 years. So that means that, roughly speaking, we need a business every 3 to 4 months, and that includes all of the ones that are going to fail.
Great. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. If anybody has a last question they want to submit, one that I have here. So you talked about how one of the reasons why you spend all of this time and energy up front with the validation is to keep your costs low, and you're not building this product up front and spending all this time and resources. At which point is it in that prototyping phase, or at which point is it worth investing in additional help or spending more to work towards this idea? Is it, or because it seems like most of the things up until that process you can kind of do on your own, whether it's creating a landing page or purchasing ads, but at which point is it worth bringing additional expertise on board to help kind of bring this to fruition?
Yeah, so I can tell you our model here is that we want to do all of the validation up front as much as we possibly can. And then we actually partner with founder CEOs. We say, we go out and recruit and say, hey, we have this new business. You have great domain knowledge, whatever it might be. And say, then we'll bring them in to actually spin out the business. But we won't do any of that until all of our validation is complete. I think for some people, let's say you're non-technical, you might need somebody to help with that validation piece. So that would be a time to bring somebody in. But really, everything that we do on the validation side should be as sweat equity driven as possible, right? It's just you doing the work here. And then once you get past that validation, once you believe this is the idea you're going to go full bore and bring the people on.
Great. So the last question I'll ask you shared that really great resource, the 7 Powers book. Are there any other book recommendations or resources that you would recommend for somebody embarking on this process?
Yeah, sure. So there's maybe I'll just say 2 books right now off the top of my head. So the first is a book called Do More Faster, and it's by the founders of Techstars, actually. And it's basically a collection of stories as lessons from very successful founders and startups around how they figured out how to move really, really quickly, validate, and grow fast. And then the second one is a new book by Reid Hoffman called Blitzscaling. that'll be a great book on sort of hyper growth stage.
Great. We just had one last question come in. Are you up for one more from the final attendee? Great. So the last question, what sectors/problems do you see having the most momentum moving forward? And what might be a good place to start for someone who doesn't quite have an idea?
Yeah. I can only tell you what I spend my time on. So here in Michigan, we believe that there's a few sectors that are just ripe for disruption. So one is mobility. You're seeing the changes in mobility just drastically, right? That's automotive and non-automotive mobility. That's going to be huge, and is mobility as a whole is certainly a multi-trillion-dollar market. Then there's automation. I think automation is pervasive across huge numbers of sectors and industries. If you say the word automation in Michigan, oftentimes people think industrial automation. I don't actually believe industrial automation is the future of automation. I think it's anything that allows a computer to do the task of a human. And I think this is going to be transformational for our economy as a whole. A lot of people will lose jobs. A lot of people will gain jobs. So there's opportunities both in the actual businesses and in automating things, as well as in retraining and figuring out new skills for others, and so on and so forth. That's a big one. Then, and I think impacts Michigan very greatly with our a lot of our factory work and things like that. Another one that I'm really excited about is fintech. I think the changes in fintech are going to be great. I'm not a blockchain or crypto person. I don't really see that yet. I think it has lots of potential in the future, but not yet. But fintech as a whole, financial technology, is changing really, really rapidly. So those are some places that I'm spending a lot of my time that I think is really good. Digital health is another one that I would say is really interesting to me. Ways to sort of help the healthcare system working within the confines of what our healthcare system in the U.S. is today.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for participating. A special thank you to Ian for his insights into the world of startup validation and scaling a business. I want to invite everyone to join us again later this week for more Career Month programming to help build your career. On Friday, November 16th, you can join us for a webinar titled Using Your Emotional Intelligence for Success and discover ways to leverage your emotional intelligence at work. After a brief hiatus during Thanksgiving week, Career Month continues with 3 more events during the last week of November. Please visit the events page on careers.uchicagoalumni.org for the full lineup of events taking place throughout the month. Take care and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.